Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tuesdays for Teachers. We're so glad to have you with us today. As you come in and as you're getting started, we will ask that you please make sure that your audio is muted, and you may want to go ahead and mute your video just because of the bandwidth that can actually impact. Before we get going, just a couple little things about this Zoom webinar. Keep your sound and video muted. We want to make sure that as we're going through, we limit the background noise. And also, if you would make sure that your questions, you put those into the chat function. In just a minute, Debbie Fawcett will be introducing everyone, and she'll be telling you more about getting those questions answered as you're coming in. And keep in mind that the session is being recorded for future viewing. It will be posted on the GED.com website under Educators and Administrators with the PD resources. So we thank you for being here with us today. And now I'm going to turn it over briefly to Debbie Fawcett and let her make the introductions.
Good afternoon or good morning to all of you. Thanks very much for joining us. We did feel, and by the registration, we knew that we had a lot of interest in what we could share with you from our content experts and our entire assessment team regarding reasoning through language arts. So Susan and I am Debbie Fawcett with the testing service, and Susan and I would like to welcome our experts who have helped us craft this presentation. Cheryl Clark Trim, and you can see her photograph there. She is the manager of test development. Also, Amy Hathorn, who is the senior content specialist. We also have our vice president of assessment, Martin Kay. He is going to help us with our chat functions and questions answered, as well as Brooke Palmer, who is working to also assist, observe, and she may not do a lot of talking in this session, but we've got some nice information to share with you about future presentations, and I know she will take a heavier role in some of those. So with that said, Susan, I'd like to welcome everybody. Please remember, we'll be answering questions in chat, and we will open up at the end of the session for things that we think we need to say aloud and additional questions. So with that said, Susan, may I turn it back over to you?
Okay, thank you, Debbie. I really appreciate that. And I want to say thank you to everybody. I mean, we see all of you popping into and introducing yourselves on chat from everywhere from Texas to Virginia to New York State to you name it, Michigan, hello, and South Carolina. It's good to see everyone here. Let me just start with just a brief comment about the fact that as we were in the planning process for this, what we noticed is that, well, RLA has a lot of information. And so what we had originally planned to do was to put this into 2 actual sessions, and we would have done that this month and next month. But as we're going through, we really felt like that we needed to do 3 components. So we're going to change things up just a little bit. Today still will be language and focusing in on that. But also we're going to add 2 more components. We'll have reading. That will be our next session coming up in April. And then writing, where we'll actually get very much into that whole writing process for the extended response. We have some great information coming from the experts today, and we really appreciate that. What I would like for you to do is, if you'll just jot down these dates, you'll see, make sure that you have them already planned, and we'll be getting out registrations for everybody for those particular sessions. We put them out usually a couple weeks before the date of the actual session itself. So with that in mind, because we have a lot of territory to cover today, and we have some wonderful information that's coming in. So I'm going to pass this off to Cheryl. If Cheryl, will you talk to us a little bit about where the focus is going to be today?
Yes, I will. Before I get started, I'm hearing some background. So if you're not on mute, if you could place yourself on mute, we would surely appreciate that. Thank you so much. So today's focus is going to be on skills gaps for reasoning through language arts. And we're going to focus on two components. So the language items, those are the editing passages and trait 3 of the prompt. So those skills go together. So it's split out a little bit differently, as Susan said, but that's what the focus will be on today. And we're going to talk about how those gaps were identified, what they are, possible reasons. We're going to give you a lot of really good examples and strategies that will help your students overcome those gaps. And by the end of our presentation today, we hope to better equip you to guide your students when they ask, what do I need to study? What do I need to do to pass this test? That's what they're concerned about. The RLA targets and indicators that we're going to look at are in the assessment guide for educators, and we'll go through that guide. Once we get to that point, I will put the link to the assessment guide for educators in the chat in case you want to access it while Amy is going through the examples and also showing it. So I will be doing that. Next slide, please, Susan. Okay, so what is a skills gap? It's the difference between what we expected our students to do and what they actually did. So what do we expect them to perform, and how do they really perform? And these might be, so these gaps are all based on data that we've seen. And some of the skills that they're having trouble with could be foundational skills. Sometimes they're more advanced skills. Either way, we believe that with a little more focus, practice, and clarification, along with the strategies we're going to give you today, that our students could answer a few more questions correctly. And that's really important, especially for students who are right on the cusp of passing the test or reaching one of those higher performance levels. And in terms of how the gaps were identified, right here on the slide, this colorful little slide, we see 3 different parts of the process. There's the part where we develop the items and passages. That's our first stage. The GED items are written by experts in their field. They're reviewed and refined by content experts here at GED Testing Service. And we already introduced Amy and Brooke. They are 2 of our experts who help refine these items and make them really solid items that we can put on our tests. The items are reviewed by content and fairness committee members. They make additional suggestions to improve the items and to ensure each item is accurate and fair. Our GED content experts update the items to incorporate the committee's feedback, and then experts who have never seen the items review and scrutinize them again to ensure that the items are error-free and fair. And then we move to the middle section, field test and analyze. So the second stage is where we analyze the data that comes in from field testing, and that's where we're identifying where some of these skills are. It's all data-based. So we look at that, and then we look at what is actually happening in the item, and that is where we're able to discern what's going on. And skills that are particularly skills that are foundational, things that we think, gosh, they should really have learned this already. Why are they getting it wrong? Those are some of the skills that we'll look at and will help kind of bridge that gap. The last stage is when we build and publish the new test forms. So fresh test forms are constructed each year to ensure our GED content remains secure, and so individual test items don't receive too much exposure. All of our GED test forms are equivalent in terms of content, difficulty, cognitive complexity to all earlier test forms in the 2014 series. And this is something that I think a lot of you have been concerned about in the past, but rest assured, Your student who takes the GED test today has the same chance of passing the test as he would have had if he took that test in 2014, 2018, or last year. The psychometric equating process and the scale that we use ensures that our tests do not become easier or more difficult over time. Every item is scrutinized, but every test form is also scrutinized, and they must adhere to strict psychometric parameters to ensure consistency and quality from year to year. So the test is not getting progressively harder. It's not getting progressively easier. All right, next slide, please. All righty. The students may need to improve their critical thinking or writing skills. That's one of the most, I guess, the most critical reason why we're seeing some of these gaps. Critical thinking and reading skills, writing skills, those are all pertinent to the RLA test, but reading skills and critical thinking skills, that's pertinent across the board. So if your students can improve their reading skills, improve those critical thinking skills, that's going to help them on all 4 tests. In some cases, in terms of why is there a gap, sometimes the student just needs more test prep. They just need to study more. The GED Ready is a great indicator of how ready they are to take that test. If they score really, really high on the GED Ready, then they're very likely to pass the GED test. It is a good predictor. And then the last bullet there, sometimes students don't perform well on certain items just because they're hard. And our test takers, our students, all have varying levels of abilities. And there are some of our students are just never going to be able to answer some of the more difficult, challenging items. And that's okay. We need some items on the test that are easy. We need some that are more difficult, more complex. That way we can distinguish between those college and career ready benchmarks, the PLDs, and then the college and career ready plus credit. So we don't expect every student to get every single answer right, but we expect our high performing students to get those more difficult, complex items correctly. All right, having said that, it's time to hand this over to Amy Hathorn to discuss the specific gaps. She's going to share some great examples and information that your students could include in their study plans. And all along the way, student Susan is going to share some specific resources for each of the gaps. All right, Amy, take it away. And in the meantime, I will post the link that I promised you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to look at, well, I'll show you where these, about these targets and indicators first, and then we'll look at specific skills gaps for some of the indicators. And then Susan and I will go back and forth and she'll share strategies. This slide is giving you a link to the assessment guide for educators, which includes all the skills that we're testing for RLA. And I don't know if they were going to bring that up as a visual. For language items, there are 13 skills that we measure. Of those 13, we identified 5 where we felt like the performance is quite different than what's expected. So we identified those as skills gaps, and those are the ones we're going to focus on today. And we'll also look a little bit at the language skills that are used in the writing test. And I'll talk more about that when we get to that section towards the end. And this last bullet directs you to a free practice test online, especially if you're new to the GED and working with it with your students. That free practice test gives you a good glimpse of what the language arts, the reasoning for language arts test looks like. And there is a section in there, an example of one of these editing items we're about to look at. And there's a screenshot also of that in the coming slide here. So you'll be able to see if you haven't seen this free practice test before. So, if you are new to GED, the reasoning through language arts test does measure skills in 3 content areas: the reading area, the language area, and the writing area. There are reading items, and that'll be in part 2 of this presentation in a month from now. And then the language items we're talking about today. And then the writing test will have a presentation in May more focused on the full scope of that. But we will look at the writing, the language skills today. Next slide, I think. Okay, and this is a good little intro. Okay, so this picture might be kind of small, and Susan can zoom in if it's possible. This shows you kind of at a glimpse what the language task looks like in the test. There'll be a passage that's around 400 words or so, and what we have is embedded drop-down items. There'll be 4 or 5 of these drop-down items embedded in the test, and each one tests one of our 13 language skills. We're very careful in development that we're testing only one skill at a time. So while the student won't know what skill is being tested, if they are well versed in all 13 of these skills, they should be able to select an option from each drop-down that uses formal standard English. And if Susan would, if I don't know if the Zoom can scroll up, there's a little directions line that appears above every one of these passages that will say, direct the student to navigate to the select button, choose the option that completes the sentence using formal standard English. So we specified that we are measuring formal standard English here. We know that everyone speaks in different ways and informally at home and different kinds of, regionalisms, but here we're just trying to measure formal standard English. And so each of these drop downs is going to reflect options in those veins. And some of the skills do relate to informality. So, well, one skill relates to informal language. So that does become relevant when we're measuring that skill. This is just a good picture of how the drop downs kind of work in context. And again, there's that link to the free practice test. This is a screenshot from the free practice test, but you can see it in detail and you can select the drop downs yourself and see how they work. Okay, next slide. So, and this is a little bit repeated, written down some of what I just said, but each drop down will test one of the 13 indicators, and the skills are things like punctuation, wordiness, usage, capitalization, homonyms, formal word choice. They're very cut and dry skills. We don't test esoteric language things. We don't test ambiguous or subjective things. We test very cut and dry things. And we have identified 5 of them where we do think there's a skills gap. So we can go to the next slide. So these are the 5 where we found some skills gaps. I moved this one, L23 with the 2 stars, to the top because that one's the most dramatic skills gap. So I put it at the top so I can talk about it first, and then we can look at the other 4. And I won't read through these here because we're going to break them out one by one, and I'll read them more in detail at those stages. But on a high level, we're looking at apostrophes, we're looking at homonyms and homophones, we're looking at subject-verb agreement, wordiness, awkward sentence construction, and then the last one there is about sentence structure for like pronoun sentences, infused sentences, and sentence fragments. And again, we have a breakout of each a breakout section for each of these skills, and we'll look more in depth at what the skills gap is, and Susan will have some strategies for your students. Next slide. So the first one, the one I put stars by because it's really dramatic to me how much the skills gap exists here. The skill is for students to ensure the correct use of apostrophes with possessive nouns, the old apostrophes thing. And I know you've all been driving down the road and you see a sign that says like hot dogs for sale, and hot dogs has an apostrophe S. And inside, if you're an English major, you cry because hot dogs is not plural, it's not possessive there, it's just a plural, it doesn't need an apostrophe. But it's a common mistake in our world is people are putting apostrophes in plurals, people are not putting apostrophes in possessives sometimes. I think our phones might make this worse. My own phone's trying to confuse me all the time and tell me you need to use an apostrophe S here when it's not a possessive. So it's possible that younger generations are struggling with phones telling them the wrong thing. All I know is from the data, we have a big skills gap here. It's a straightforward skill, it's easy rules, but yet a lot of students are missing this. And our data does break out like student performance, like we can see how high performing students do and low performing students, and all students across the board who take the GED are struggling with this particular skill. So it really is an area where you could help your students if you can reinforce these measuring the skill of when to use an apostrophe for possessive. And the tricks, the catch with apostrophes is, you do it one way for a plural noun, one way for a singular noun, and then if it's got an S, you might add an apostrophe S on top, and then you don't use apostrophe in a plural. In a non-possessive plural. And we also, for this kind of item type, we will not test non-possessive plurals. We only test possessive nouns. So that's one thing to help remember. The skill is about possessive nouns. So we're not testing places where you wouldn't have an apostrophe. So here's an example. Now, this is an example just kind of pulled out of context. If you remember the slide we just showed of the picture of how the task looks, there'll be a whole passage, and the whole passage is something the student needs to read so that every drop down they're answering with all the information possible. And in this case, What might be outside the dropdown? Well, you want to make sure when you're selecting the option that you've got the plural and singular correct for your noun that you're doing possessives with. In this example, the first sentence says, for years, the family had 1 cat and 2 dogs. That's to show you in the context, it will be clear if we're
Donald J. Trump's
somebody needs
catastrophic
to,
final year. Philip Rucker, he is senior Washington correspondent and for the Washington Post and political analyst for MSNBC and NBC News. Phil, I just want to first
So
ask
can you guys
what you were
please
thinking
check your
was
mute button to
thinking
see if
about
you're
like
muted?
that.
We're hearing somebody that sounds like they have the news on in the background. Thank you.
thanks very much. Okay, and I hope I'm off mute. Okay, all right, so the context here shows the 1 cat and 2 dogs. Now the context may not be right there in front of where the drop down is, but the passage is going to make it clear we're dealing with 1 middle school or 1 parent or 1 this. So like you're going to know from the context of the passage if the noun is singular or plural. It'll be very clear somehow. So the student does need to read the whole passage to make sure they're, got that part right. And then the options will be things like this. They'll mix and match uses of the possessives. So in this case, the top one is what would be correct. Cats would need an apostrophe S because it's a singular possessive. And at the end, dogs would need an S apostrophe because it's a plural possessive. And that would be the correct one to choose. And everything else is a combination of something that's wrong. And you'll see number 2 here is the no apostrophes option. And that's how you would show plural nouns that are not possessive, right? So in this case, I think a lot of students would choose the second option here. And that's kind of where we want to reinforce the skill. Possessive nouns get apostrophes and non-possessive nouns don't. And a lot of people have it reversed in their heads. And like I said, I think our phones really are trying to get us to do it the wrong way, especially if you text and message a lot on the phone. I know I do, and I know it's always trying to get me to do the wrong thing. So that's my example from an L23 about this apostrophe skill. I think next Susan has the strategy slide or some slides.
Yes, I do. I had to unmute myself.
All right, that's good. You can unmute.
Thank you. So I want to start with something, just the importance of proofreading. And this is something that I'm not sure we necessarily as teachers spend enough time with, but we really want to make sure that students, improve the overall quality of their writing and to ensure there are no mistakes and to correct those errors. And we can start with simple things as we're going through to have students just, okay, I want you to proofread today and I want you to check for, and maybe today we're checking for the use of apostrophes. But simple things as they're getting started so that they're always kind of in the mindset of leaving enough time to proofread. They know that's important. And also to think in terms of, do I, as a writer, have a mental list of areas that I know are often problematic for me? And if so, then I can make sure that at least, if I'm not thinking of anything else, at least I can check those particular areas as I'm going through. And you'll notice I have a QR code over here for OWL, which many of you have been using Purdue's OWL for a long time. But if you haven't recently, then you may want to go back in and take a look at some different things. They have some wonderful resources just talking about the importance of proofreading itself. And then one of the things you may want to do is kind of look at this, why are apostrophes such a problem? Well, here's an example. And I'm going to think about, Amy and the cell phone, but look around at what we see. This is just a little slide taken, from one of the Pinterest where look where all of those apostrophes are. Is it any wonder that students have difficulty when they go through and they're looking and they're seeing the misuse of apostrophes? So take time, go through, spend some time on reviewing the use of apostrophes itself. And you might want to do a daily fix that sentence challenge. And I've given you an example up here where you may want to go through it and put in a number of different things and see, can they go through and know that Mary's should have an apostrophe sitting there, but sons wouldn't? find out what they can and can't do, and look at it from a standpoint of students being able to do this in context. So they're actually reading something as they're going through. And this just becomes the challenge. You can post it up on the whiteboard or your smart board, and at some point bring everybody together and say, okay, let's do our fix that sentence review and see how the students are actually doing with that. Simple little things that we can do. Okay, so Amy, I'll move it back to you.
Okay, I think I'm off mute again. The next skills gap was around the L11 indicator, and the language there, or that skill there, is that students will correct errors that involve frequently confused words and homophones, including various contractions. And the indicator language here gives some examples like past and past, to, and to, which are common ones, there, and there, new and new, it's and its. We test far more than these examples in the parentheses, but that's just to give an example of the kind of, homophones we're talking about. The gap is that some students are just choosing the wrong words, and this is another concrete basic skill. These are words that we learn over time, and we just need to memorize which one is the correct one for various contexts and how they get used. Common mistakes in the gap section here is there, and there, to and to. Not so much the TWO number one, although that certainly is part of to and to errors. And then your and your, where we have your as the possessive and your as the contraction. These are, these three basic ones are pretty common where there are mistakes made, and there are mistakes you also see in the real world. So, in measuring the test, we're trying to measure real world skills. So these are relevant skills. Here's some examples of just how the that's okay. Of how the homophones work. This is not broken out the way we have 4 options in every drop down, but the options here, you can imagine they would be like mixed and matched. So the bold-faced one at the top is the correct sentence. That would be the correct answer in that drop down, and then where I have the not example, that would be the fully wrong answer, and there would be 2 other drop downs for 2 other options in every drop down that would have one correct and one wrong, and they'd flip flop which is correct and which is wrong. And that's how the structure of the items would work. And you can see that it's a straightforward skill. The student just needs to know which is the right word for each context. It's just a language skill that's pretty straightforward. So where we see the data showing that this is pretty difficult, then we know it just needs more instruction in the field. There just needs to be more learning ahead of time before you take the test, what the correct word is for each of these contexts. So, as a teacher, you could get lists of the homophones that are commonly used out in the world and help students just learn which ones are the correct, which ones are the correct ones for various contexts. So that's the example there. And Susan, I think the next slide is yours for some strategies.
Okay, so first of all, I can't take credit for the passage on the left because that is from another teacher that's out there. And I love that when we do this. But you know what? I just thought this is so neat because we can go through, we can talk about one of those really serious problems that's out there. It's the problem with its. It's not that difficult when you know how and when to use its. You just must put its in its place. Finally, its is never correct. We need to spend some time with students on these types of things. And one of the best things I can recommend for you is actually pull some of your junk mail and take it to class with you. Because unfortunately, our junk mail is loaded with problems with accept and accept. And we've got there and all of those different types of words. And what better way than to use your junk mail and to show students that, hey, sometimes even in the best of circumstances, we end up with some problems. But there is one other thing. If you haven't used Quizlet Plus, you may want to consider doing that. They're wonderful resources. You can create your own, you can share them with other teachers. And this particular one is actually set up for 7th grade. perfect for us though. This particular one starts off, if you know Quizlet, starts off with flashcards. Students can learn first, they can write, they can spell, and they have a wonderful thing with a match game. So they can actually physically work with these and match up. What does that particular word mean? And how is it used correctly or not? It's a great activity. So, and the URL is posted on the slide there, so you can easily find it, or you can just go to Quizlet Plus and you could put in misused words and you'll find that there are lots of different things that are available for this. So having said that, I'll pass back to Amy because we have more skills.
I can't remember if we're on the third or the fourth now, but the next one is L17. The skill here is for students to correct errors in subject, verb, or pronoun antecedent agreement in more complicated situations. And that last little phrase there distinguishes this from another. If you're looking at the assessment guide for indicators, or you're already familiar with it, there's another indicator that measures pronoun usage in like normal cases. The complicated situations is where some kind of phrase is separating the subject away from the verb. And we're not ready for the next slide yet, but I'll show you an example on the next slide. The gap here is that students sometimes don't recognize the correct subject, and sometimes they just need some practice on their verb parts. And that is a skill that we know that informal standard English can differ from some people's daily at-home usage. So it is a place to remember we're teaching formal standard English here, and that's what we're measuring in this test. So the students need to choose the correct verb form in the drop downs, and that will give them the right answers. So I think if we look at the next slide, we'll see an example. And again, the trickiness here with this indicator is this is more complicated situations. So there's some kind of phrase is going to interrupt between where the subject is and the verbs. So this is a picture of kind of how a dropdown would look. Remember, this will be in a whole passage. There'll be a whole passage around it. In this case, the manager is the subject. And I kind of highlighted in yellow to make it stand out so you can visually really see how the manager and that blank space that represents where the dropdown would go, they're separated. There's a prepositional phrase and a relative clause stuck in there, you know, separating out where the manager and the verb are. And this is, of course, something, even when you're, you know, not super knowledgeable about grammar, you might start constructing complicated sentences because it's just natural in how we think. And the more elaborate our thoughts get, the more complicated our sentences get. So any reader or writer out in the world who's got big thoughts might be having a lot of clauses in their sentences. So it's a real important skill to know when you're checking your verb, your verb forms and proofreading your own work, which subject is this actually going to? So you don't want to be connecting these verbs to the word summer. You don't want to connect them to the word warehouse. You know, you want to know where the word manager is. So this one is a more subtle skill than some of the other indicators we're talking about in this presentation. The student does need to develop an awareness of their sentence structure. Sometimes you can just get a feel for, well, the manager is the one who's thanking and reporting. And that really is the trick to getting these right, is ignoring, you got to erase from your mind all those interceding phrases and what word, who is doing the thanking and the reporting. The manager thanks and reports. So, you know, really the student just wants to cover up all those interceding phrases and then choose the correct option kind of that way. So in this case, the manager thanks the entire staff for supporting new safety policies and reports. And I hope you can see how there's a lot of extra words, but the verbs simply are thanks, reports, and manager is that subject. So this is an area where there's a skills gap, and it would be good. It would help students do better on the test overall if they practice the skill and learn a good strategy, which is how to ignore the extra words and find where your subject really is. And then just read the sentence with just the subject. The manager thinks and reports that we continue to see fewer accidents. And that's the way to identify those correct verbs. And if you look at it that way, which does require you know, that will get you to the correct answer. And that's, you know, I think Susan has more strategies, and we can go to the next slide.
Well, I decided that I should debut my cats here with this one and keep it simple. My cat is sleeping by the fireplace. My cats are sleeping by the fireplace. Sounds pretty easy. You know, it's not a big deal as we go through this. However, there are those, as Amy put it, complicated situations. And so what we want to do is make sure that we work with our students to provide just different examples. Again, this is just another one where we could have, that fix my sentence of the day and actually go through and use different ones. Work with things like compound subjects. And remember that sometimes some compound subjects are intended to be singular, like peanut butter and jelly. But also make sure, that as they're working through, they understand how the process works. Interceding phrases, that's an easy one. They could construct sentences. Think about it. Have them set up their own sentences and use the wrong verb and then switch with someone else. And then they go through and the other person has to make the correction. Things that students, they can have some ownership within all of that. And also you're going to want to take a look at those collective nouns as well, just like the football team. It's not the football team are, the football team is practicing. So use the different examples, introduce them at different times, and give students an opportunity to just work with them in different ways. And as I said, come up with some of their own. Now, the other thing that was mentioned within this was pronoun antecedent agreement. And I'm going to recommend a website for you to use because they have wonderful examples, and that's Towson University Online Writing Support. They have lots of different examples, all using different types of issues that students have with pronouns and their antecedents or their referent, whichever one word that may be used in a given situation. But again, take advantage of some of the examples that can be found out on the web itself, and that can make a big difference. I love this one because it's very much showing them what is going on within a sentence so that students can become more familiar with it. So having said that, Amy, you're up.
Thank you. All right, our fourth skills gap is the L18 indicator. This indicator is students will edit to eliminate wordiness or awkward sentence construction. So an item for this will have four options in the drop down like all the others. And 3 of them will be very clearly wordy or awkward in some way. And the way the sentence is constructed, and 1 of them will be correct using formal standard English. The wordiness examples will not test gray areas. Like sometimes in life, we use repetition rhetorically to create emphasis or effect. We will not like put something like that as a wrong answer here because it would be arguable if it's actually wrong because maybe it's creating an effect. So the skills gap here is that sometimes students are just choosing a wordier option. I think some people do have in their mind that more words is always better. But it's not the case in this skill. Now, and when the student's going through the test and that, each passage with the drop downs, they're not going to know what skills being tested where. They just have a drop down with 4 options. And then they need to, and they know their job is to select the best choice of those 4 options. So where this skill is coming up in the drop downs, I would say they just need to read every option carefully and they're looking for, they want to recognize where there are options that are like wordy in some way. And the wordiness would be, there's something being repeated for no effect, for no purpose, just completely extra and redundant. So if that makes any sense. And sometimes what's happening in this skills gap is that test takers are choosing words that do repeat a lot of things without any real effect to it. And I think sometimes it's just that thought that more words is better. And we do see it in student writing samples as well. Some people think if they can just fill up the page with a lot of words, they've done a good job. But really, you want your words to all have power and meaning. And so that the editing process is, that choosing of the right words. So that kind of explains what the skills gap is. And then I'd flip to the next slide. The next slide is going to have an example. Yeah, so we have an example here. I've highlighted in red in the wrong options some of the examples of like things that would be wordy. And this is these drop downs are repeating like the whole sentence. The way it would be in the passage is we would only have in the drop downs the parts that are changing from option to option. But for simplicity's sake, I just kind of left it as one like big long sentence. And you can see in every case it's a long sentence, but there's just in each one, there's some very wordy things that are clearly repeating something else in the sentence. So this also, we mentioned earlier that there's a writing test as well. And part of our presentation today is going to look at the writing traits that relate to language skills. And this one does come up a lot as a skill in the writing prompt. So a student who works hard on learning more about L18 as an indicator is going to improve their score, not only in the language test, but also in the writing test when they write their essay. If they can really edit out some of their extra wording, that is one of the areas where students make mistakes in the writing prompt, in the extended response essay part of the test, which is connected to the language skills. And we'll get more into detail about that at the latter part of the presentation. I guess that would be called Act 3, I don't know. So that's the example here. Susan, I think you have strategies next.
I do. And I also have a correction from Marty, who is a former Baltimorean, and to tell me that it's Towson, not Tosin. So having been a South Carolinian and not recognizing that correct pronunciation, I apologize to any of those out there who are going, oh no, I can't believe she said it that way. But let's talk a little bit about this wordiness thing, because I have to tell you that of all of my students that were out there, this was one of the worst issues that they had. And I think Amy said it correctly a few minutes ago when she said, I don't know whether they just thought a lot more words were better. And that really is it sometimes with students, is that they look at this and they go, oh, but if I write these really super long sentences, it's just going to look much better on my writing itself. Well, no. So just a couple of things that you can talk with students about. Start with the process of avoiding some phrases like it is or there are at the beginning of a sentence. And this is something students do a lot. They really do. So rather than going, it is expensive to upgrade a computer, then let's change it up a little bit. Upgrading computers is expensive. We can also go from that passive to more active. And we're not necessarily trying to be short, choppy sentences. We're trying to be more concise and have this so that it's much more readable as we're going through. Use those strong verbs instead of could see, the committee saw several solutions. And one-word modifiers rather than a whole prepositional phrase. Those are the types of things that we can do. And of course, one of the big ones is to combine two closely related short sentences by just omitting part of one. If you can spend some time working with students and giving them a sentence and how could you make this sentence stronger, and let them practice with that type of thing. Let them see examples of strong and effective sentences that aren't going down that wordy trail. That can make a big difference as well. So having said that, I know this is a big one for a lot of different areas. So Amy, run-ons, fused, and sentence fragments.
So the L22 Skills Gap, the indicator for L22 is that students will eliminate run-on sentences, fused sentences, and sentence fragments. And I don't know about everybody, fused sentences was a new kind of term to me whenever I started working on GED. I'd always been taught to call it a comma splice, but it is this, when you join two sentences by just slapping a comma in there and combine them that way. Looks pretty good, it's got a comma, but it's called a comma splice or a fused sentence, as I learned in my later life. At any rate, so the drop downs for these are gonna have 4 choices like always, and each choice will reflect one of the things implied in the in the indicator language. So there will be a choice that creates a run-on sentence. There will be a choice that creates a fused sentence or comma splice, and there will be a choice that creates a sentence fragment, and there will be a correct choice that does correct sentence structure. These are very straightforward items in terms of what the skill is. The errors are not ambiguous. What I've noticed in reviewing the data and looking through several items, like how the students performed on those individual items, is a lot of students will choose the fused sentence. A lot of students will choose the sentence fragment. I'd say fused sentence is number 1, sentence fragment's number 2, and less choose the run-on sentence. So they're doing a pretty good job eliminating the run-on sentence. You know, it's some people do still pick that, maybe 10, 15%, depends on the item. Some people will still pick the run-on sentence, but a lot more flock toward the fused sentence or the sentence fragment. So we could have an item where like 20% of people chose the correct thing and 20% chose the fused sentence and 20% chose the sentence fragment. So, you know, we want to reteach or teach the skill so that they all can recognize what a comma splice is or what the fused sentence is and what the fragment is. And now these also, the drop down isn't going to show the whole sentence, it's going to show the part that's different. So they do need to read the whole sentence before and after the drop down, or multiple sentences is often the case. So they need to read the whole area around that drop down. Which just, you know, sometimes if you have test anxiety, you got to stop, take a breath, read that whole area again, and then choose the drop down that's creating, amongst all the words there, creating the right sentences. So, and you want to not choose the sentence, the comma splice or the fused sentence, and you want to not choose something that creates a fragment. And so teaching those skills of what those different things are could be quite helpful. And let's see. Yeah, I think we're ready to see the next slide, which is the example. This example shows how a sentence, how a sentence pulled out from the passage would look. And that blank would be, of course, the drop down area. And the drop down would say select, and it would have these 4 options. And you can see we've got one option for each of the type of mistake. We've got a correct one, we've got a fused sentence, we've got a fragment, and we've got a run-on sentence. And you can see how in these options, it's only showing the part of the sentence that's varying in the wording. So they need to definitely read that in the context, right? And if you read it carefully in the context, you can see, like in option 3 here, you can see we've got, she thanks the entire staff for supporting these policies. That is a sentence, but putting the period there creates a fragment for the next sentence, reports that we continue to see fewer accidents. So that last sentence continues outside the drop down, and it is a sentence without a subject. So that one becomes a fragment. Some students would choose that. A lot of students would probably choose that. They do need to make sure they read everything around the actual drop down, because that is very integral in how to answer these items. I'd say that's the case for all the language items. Some, it's way more essential than others. And this is an area, this skill, this indicator is definitely one where you've got to read the whole area before and after the drop down. So if a student's anxious about reading, they just need to take a breath and read it all carefully. And I would apply that logic to all the language indicators, but doing that will certainly help you with this indicator, the L22. So, and it's a very straightforward item type. It shouldn't have, it shouldn't have data that performs in a weird way, but it is one that's proving to have a skills gap. So, and maybe there's some strategies Susan can share with us. Next.
So just a real quick thing here with compound confusion. And because we hear all these terms and we go, whoa, wait a minute. I recognize what a run-on is. And I know what a comma splice is, but that fused sentence is a bit of a problem for me. Well, they're all names given to compound sentences that are not punctuated correctly. I mean, that's really what comes in mind with all the different things. And yes, this is a big issue. One of the things you may want to take a look at is GCF Global. They have some wonderful examples of different types of materials that are out there, and they're all free. So I love this in the passage up here. If I seem a little crazy, angry, and grouchy right now, it is, I think, because Emily, my coworker, who sits at the next cash register, keeps singing that song from the cartoon where the chicken keeps exploding and the little boy tries to make the chicken angry. And I think I'm going to explode if I hear that song one more time. Whew. Well, I will say that when all is said and done, I have seen students who can write sentences like that. Now, and they go on forever with trying to put as much information as possible in those. And so what we want to do is get students into the normal. What do we have? Where can we work with all these different things? So one other thing you may want to do is Khan Academy has more and more RLA type materials on it. And so there is one that's available now on run-ons and comma splices. Sometimes students just need to hear it from a different voice, not from our voice, but from someone else. And so you may want to use a video for students. And of course, this is something that you could have students view on their phones, and then the next day they come to class, or they're Zooming into class, and you actually go through and review what they've learned and can introduce from there. You kind of flip the classroom as far as that goes. And the other thing that you may want to do is just have students go through and have them check for their sentences, check their sentences. Does it have a subject? Is there a verb? Is it just a leftover phrase? Is it I love this, abandoned clause, just something left hanging out there? Was such as, or for example, especially, misused? Were all those things misused and going through? So what I would recommend that you do is actually give students some examples. Have them go through and tell you, is this a sentence or not? Ran to the store faster than a greyhound racing toward the finish line. Okay, that's pretty long. We sometimes, and our students especially, get it in their heads that a sentence fragment is something that's real short. Well, not necessarily. Or we could have her favorite American history teacher did what? We don't know. We don't have a verb to go along with this. Have students do some competition in working with this, for better or worse. Fine, that's just a leftover phrase sitting out there. So, and tell you what is wrong with these different components. You can make up sentences, you can take sentences from different things and mess them up, but have students go back and fix those different things. Again, all of this really comes back to just some practice and spending some time in this area. The other thing you can do is use the acronym R, ARR, to fix that fragment where you attach to another sentence, you revise by adding what is missing, or maybe this is one of those cases where you just have to rewrite the fragment itself. But if you talk to students about just using this particular acronym and they get into that habit, that's going to help them as they're going through and doing their own writing, which we want them to always come back, proofread, edit, revise, all of those different things. So another possibility for students. And one thing I want you to keep in mind, we want to make sure what we do is we increase our students' engagement when it comes to working with language items. We want to show them why grammar matters. As that photo says, punctuation saves lives. Let's eat, Grandma. Let's eat, Grandma. There is a difference in what you're saying. Put grammar in context whenever you can. It is much better for students to be able to do that and work with it from that angle than rather than just having an X amount of number of sentences that they just have to correct. Have them correct a letter or a long email or some passage that they have to go in and make the changes, and create those daily grammar challenges so that they understand that this is important. It's important to you. It is important to them as they're working through. So we're going to go a little bit into how these language skills actually impact that GED extended response, because trait 3 of the scoring rubric evaluates standard English writing conventions and clarity. And so if we make sure that on this front end where we've been talking about all these different language skills gaps, that can have an effect on the student's extended response itself. And so even though we're going to really go with session 3 is going to address the extended response much more depth than what we're doing today, there are a few things that we wanted to cover at this particular point in time. So Amy, I will pass it back to you to talk to us just a little about, language and the extended response.
Sure thing. Thank you, Susan. And stop me if we get too close to the Q&A time. We have about 30 minutes total left, I think. As Susan mentioned, we all know there's a writing portion of the test. It's called the extended response. The students will write an essay and show their writing skills, their organization skills, their argumentation skills. We are today looking at language, so we're going to focus on the part of this that's going to, where language skills are going to contribute to their score. Before we get a little into that, just as a high level, this is what the extended response will look like in the test. They'll be on the right side, a big old box where they're going to write their essay. Now that's a scrollable box. Once they start writing in there, it'll go on to infinity if they need to keep on writing. And they're going to need more space than just what you see here because they're trying to write a full essay. On the left side, on page 1, which is shown here, is a prompt. Well, we're going to call it instructions, but it gives essentially the prompt of what the task is, what you're needing to do. You're going to read 2 passages and they're going to appear on page 2 of this little tab. When the students in the test, they can click on page 2 and it'll show 2 passages. And in 99% of cases, it's 2 completely separate passages. And both authors of these passages are arguing a different point of view on something, like the same kind of topic, but they're opposite points of view, and they're each going to argue their case. And the student then needs to reflect on all that and choose or analyze these 2 arguments and decide which of these authors is making the better case using better evidence to make their argument. Now, and we emphasize in the prompt, they're not trying to argue pick the one they agree with. They're trying to pick the one that's the best argued. So, if we feel like for high school graduates, you should be able to analyze an argument. It's not about what you agree with, it's about which is the stronger case. And then they're going to write an essay explaining that. The essay, I think if we click to the next slide, this might break out the traits. So the slide, the second bullet here shows their essay response will get scored on 3 traits. The first one's creation of arguments, use of evidence. The second one is development of ideas and organizational structure. And those 2 we'll talk about in depth at that third presentation in May. The third trait is the one that deals with language, and we've got it in blue here, but they're going to be scored on their clarity and command of standard English conventions. And if we flip to the next slide, I think this breaks out the rubric on that trait 3. Yeah, so the trait 3 rubric, they get a score of 2, 1, or 0. The score of 2 points, which would be the perfect score, is going to, that response will show all of these skills here. And now, if you look at these skills in the rubric here, and you look at our language indicators that are used in the language items, it's essentially the same skills. They're just in a different order and kind of structured a little differently here in the writing test. But we're focused on these clear-cut skills. Although there is some little differences, like up here, varied sentence structure within a paragraph or paragraphs, things that test fluency of language are kind of added here, because in this writing prompt, they now have a chance not only to show their understanding of basic conventions, but how they put words together and create a full thing, a full text of their own words. So there's a lot of overlap, though, between the language skills that are broken out in those 13 indicators and the drop for the editing task items, and these skills that they'll be scored for in their conventions and clarity. So there's a lot of overlap. And if they improve their skills in the language drop-down items, which is to simulate an editing task, then they can apply those same editing skills on their response here in the extended response item. And you can read through these skills, on your own. But the biggest area that I've seen when I look at the score responses is they need to show that fluency of language, show that they're comfortable with words, how to use words, how to express their ideas. So varying sentence structure is the natural symptom of somebody who's, comfortable using words and showing fluency of language. So if we flip to the next slide, I think it breaks out some of the things where the next slide will break out some of the areas that have a kind of a skills gap. So I looked through, there's some annotated anchor papers that are online, and we have links to that in the below areas, which we're not there yet. But I went through those kind of annotations for the anchor papers and pulled out the kind of mistakes that were creating, that were happening in in essays that get a score of 1 versus essays that get a score of 0. So you can see if you kind of scan through this chart here, people who are getting a score point of 1 might have pretty good sentence structure or inconsistent sentence structure, where people who get a score of 0 might tend to have consistently flawed sentence structure or consistently awkward sentences. And in the second row, if you're getting a score of 0, you might have your sentences might have some variety, but you might have structure issues and fluency issues. You know, in the third row, you might have sentences that have a lot of errors, that are awkward, that are illogical, that have a lack of fluency. You might be using a lot of run-ons or awkward constructed sentences. So they're just things that show an overall lack of fluency. So you can see from this chart the kind of traits in the writing that are leading to scores of 0 or scores of 1. And, you know, obviously, the more a student can improve, the more of a chance they can have to get the full 2 points for the essay. If you can flip to the next slide, I think this breaks out. Yeah, okay, so there's this slide and the one following it have some links to a lot of really great documents that are online for the extended response. This top link here is a place where you can find annotated responses for each score point. If you haven't already seen this on GED.com, definitely go look at it. It's a great document if you want to help students improve their scores. Pages 111 through 136 deal with trait 3, which is the one that deals with language skills. There's a sample prompt with a scoring guide and a rubric for each trait. So that's a good sample prompt. That's a very good resource. There's an example of a perfect score, so you can see what kind of essay would get full 2 points. And all of these are scored based on a rough draft mentality. They're not looking for perfect writing. They're looking for good writing for a solid rough first draft of writing. If you click to the next slide, this one has more links. These are more, a little more background. That previous slide was more about specifically the scoring, and this has a lot of great links. The third bullet here, there's a whole collection of really good videos online about improving your writing, your extended response score. I really recommend all those videos. They're really well done and they're really helpful resources. And there's sample text. The last 2 bullets point to sample text and some sample prompts that can be used for practice. So there's a lot of good resources for the writing test. And we'll look more and more about into that in part 3 in May, but here's some good links that are a good starting point if you're interested. And I think that might be the end of the slides on this. Yeah, so we have time for the Q&A, and Susan, I don't know how you wanted to handle all that.
Well, at this point, I'm going to ask Debbie, Cheryl, or Marty, are there some common questions that we're seeing that need to be addressed at this point?
Cheryl, I've seen you and Marty very busily answering some of these. So I think you are the best to discuss with them some of the more common questions that I've seen pop up in here.
Right, sure. And Amy can weigh in on this one. I was going to type a response, but I think we can just talk about it since there's time. So the question was, is it true that there's a minimum word count on the extended response? And Amy, you can jump in here at any time. I would say it's not that there's a minimum word count. It's that the student needs to write a robust response. It can't be a summary. So, okay, if they write like a sentence, no, that's not scoreable. It has to be robust enough to be scoreable, and it can't be just a regurgitation. It needs to be drawing on what is in that prompt and the arguments, and like, why do you favor one argument over another? Amy, help me out here. I'm not sure that I'm giving a robust enough response.
Sure. Yeah, I'll happily speak to this. Some of this overlaps what we'll present in part 3. However, I think it's good to talk about now because it does relate to how the language responses, how trait 3 will be scored in your students' responses. Like Cheryl was saying, if Oh, okay, there's not a minimum word count, no. However, I've seen a lot of anchor paper type scores or type responses where they write 2 or 3 sentences and they get a score of 0, and those 2 or 3 sentences could be perfect, but it's not enough evidence to show fluency or to show completion of the task, right? So certainly they can't demonstrate the things for trait 1 and trait 2, which would be their argumentation. You're not building a very elaborate argument in 3 sentences, and you're not showing a lot of organization in just 3 sentences, but also in just those little 3 sentences, if they write a really short response, they're not showing sentence variety over a course of a text. They're not showing consistent use of good grammar skills because they're not showing enough volume. So while there is no minimum word count, the amount they write does matter. However, that said, we all know the kind of student, and we talked about this before with the wordiness indicator, there's a kind of mentality for some students that, oh, if I just write more, it's going to be better, right? And there's, lots of enthusiasm. I remember when I taught high school, there was enthusiastic kids who would write so much, but they weren't saying very much with what they were writing. They needed to, refine and push their ideas farther and get a little deeper in their analysis. So that's also the task here. So they need to write a full response. And in part 3, we'll break out they can write the response in a lot of different ways, but, one formulaic way you can approach this kind of assigned essay, you can write the 7-paragraph essay where each paragraph does a certain job. If you're writing 7 fleshed out paragraphs, you're going to have a pretty good essay, or at least the potential for a pretty good essay that could show good organization and could show good analysis of an argument. And while you're doing all that, you're also showing your fluency with language, your command of conventions. So while there's no minimum word count, and I don't mean to belabor this answer, but it's a really good question. While there's no minimum word count, the amount you write in a meaningful way is going to improve your score if you're a student for the GED. I hope that answers the question pretty well. We have some more examples about that'll come up in part 3, so do come back in May. But I do think it's a really, really good question.
And Amy,
and Jennifer, go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, this is Debbie, and in the way that Susan and I very often have this discussion with our teachers, because I know what you meant when you said you may want a 7-paragraph, but there are some teachers who will hang to that and think that they should have an X number of paragraphs. So I just want to reiterate what you did say. There is not a formula for a number of paragraphs or a number of words. It simply means, do you answer the question that is asked of you in the prompt? And do you do it in a way that makes the argument through your analysis and evaluation of what you have to say? And
Yes.
You said everything right, but I think it's so important. What we have learned is that we get a lot of questions all the time about, do you need so many words? Are they looking for keywords? And the answer is no, there are no quote keywords that are looked for. And is there a formulaic number of paragraphs? And that is also a no.
Yes,
Okay?
and if Susan would flip back a few slides to the picture of the way the prompt looks, everything required is actually in the prompt. It's going to be slide 37, I think, this one. So down there, it says, type your response in the box on the right. Your response should be approximately 4 to 7 paragraphs of 3 to 7 sentences each. Now, this is not a requirement. No one's going to count that. However, we've learned that volume or that quantity might be help get you towards a better argument. If you're writing a lot less than that, you may not be giving enough detail in your argument or enough elaboration. And this is a wide range. 4 to 7 is a big range. There's a lot of ways you could structure the response to this. It doesn't have to be 7 paragraphs. It doesn't have to be 4, but what it has to cover is certain material. And then 3 to 7 sentences, that's a big range. There's a large range. There's a lot you can do within that, but it does give a sense of, if you're writing a whole lot less than that, you might ask yourself, am I answering the question? Am I fully fleshing out an answer here? Because we are looking for, trait 1 and trait 2 and trait 3. And every response is going to be, scored for all 3 of those traits. So you want to write enough that you're showing the full meat. However, it's not graded on volume. It's graded on content and quality. And that really is the important thing to know.
So Amy, I want to move
if
on
I
now because
could-
there are a couple of questions in here about the ER and the score and some concerns about people scoring zeros. So the ER on the GED Ready is scored by you, the adult educator. So I'm assuming that maybe people are getting zeros on the scores of their GED tests. I'm not quite clear. There are a couple questions regarding it. And someone said, is that because it is scored by a computer? No, there's a special engine that is trained to score the ERs. But if a particular response is not scorable, then that will kick it out to human scorers, and there will be multiple human scorers who score each of the traits. So you're not getting a zero because of the way it's scored by artificial intelligence. That's not what's driving it. It's the response that the students are giving. If you had a question or a concern, if your student said, look, I wrote 4 really robust paragraphs, I really feel like I did great on this and I got a 0, then reach out to us, reach out to, GED, the helpline, and, we can take a look at that. We definitely want to be fair. But if all they did was just summarize and just regurgitate what was in the prompt, then that's not going to score as, that may be why they did not get a good score. It can't be a regurgitation.
Yes.
Cheryl, I want to, thank you, because I think it's good to hear it from the assessment team side. And either Susan and I, and Susan, I'm going to give you a chance to jump in, but Susan and I know what we hear in talking with teachers. And we too have a way that we address this with teachers that I think adds a little understanding to it. The question about, was it the electronic scoring tool the students are getting a 0? That doesn't mean they're not writing. And I say this all the time because I'm not a psychometrician. It would have been much easier and probably more palatable had the psychometrics worked out where the scoring would have been a 1, 2, or a 3, because a 1 is a number people could go, okay, I got the lowest score as a 1. But I do know that something about reaching that 0, it brings a whole different feeling to a student. It doesn't mean that they didn't have writing, but as they have just explained, it did not meet the standards to go above the answers to score at a higher level. A couple of things there. I don't know, Susan, if you'd like to add something to that.
Well, there are a couple things that I'd like to just briefly talk about. And you should see on the screen now, I'm actually over in GED.com, and I am in the educators and admins section of this. What I have done is I have gone into the free classroom materials, and earlier Amy mentioned or Cheryl mentioned the free practice test. So there's where you find that. But also I wanted to pull you over here to the extended response tools and practice. If you have not yet gone in to take a look at the resource guides here, I can't emphasize enough what a difference it will make to you when you do. Because as I pull up this is the response, this is taxation and revenue. And they have given a lot of information. They've got your source material that's here. But one of the best things ever within this is the fact that, and let me pull down, I don't want to make anybody dizzy going through all this, but this is an example here. And I know we had in the chat, someone said, well, there's a sample in the chat and it only has 3 paragraphs and it's still got, some points off of it. So yes, it did. It got some points I got a point for organization, but it's important for you as an instructor, if you will go through, take a look at these responses, read through them, and then read through the annotations, you'll begin to see why students are scoring the way they're scoring. I know we have a lot of teachers who are extremely frustrated right now because their students are getting a 0 in all 3 traits. And a part of that comes back to just not answering the question. They're not responding to the prompt. And a big part of that, and we're going to talk about it extensively in May, is the fact that our students are summarizing. They're not analyzing and evaluating information. So use a little bit of, take a little time in order to go through, look at some of these materials that are there. The other thing I will tell you is that you have some source text. There's a GED Ready practice test. There's scoring tools for the GED Ready test itself. So there's so much information that's a possibility for you. And keep in mind, it's in Spanish as well as the English version. So use those materials to help you better understand how the scoring works. Because Debbie and I say this all the time to teachers who are out there. Writing is so important. And evidence-based writing, like this type of writing that we're doing on the extended response, where the students are making an argument and they're supporting it with evidence, is so important in their future as they're working in real life. That's the type of writing that we so often do. So keep that in mind as you're going through.
And if you can stay there for just a second,
Sure.
Susan, so this is, some people are asking for the link to the certificate and materials. They've not been posted, but this is the area where it will be posted in the adult educator section of GED.com.
Yes.
And if you maybe navigate to
If
it.
they will just go to educators and admins, and there's always confusion in terms of, do I have to sign up or do I have to log in? No, all they have to do is click on the blue button. And then when they do, they'll see to the side here, it says professional development training, view resource. And that will take them to this page, which is webinar trainings. They access the webinars. And this is the one that we did in February. And you can see here that there's this certificate to be downloaded. So when this video and the resources that go along with it are posted, a certificate will also be posted at the same time. And they'll be able to come right in, download it, print it out, sign it, and they're done.
There's also a lot of information in the chat, questions in the chat about the ER and should they just skip the ER? Absolutely not. That's 20% of the test.
And Cheryl, if we could address that in some ways that we often do.
And that's, the other thing is there's a lot more questions in here about the ER, but let's kick them to that last session. If we could, I think some of them will be answered in the process of Amy going through her presentation.
Right.
So my apologies.
Just as a general note in something in a wider scale, because we hear that, well, if they can pass the test without taking the ER, why should they bother? And what we always say is, well, that's 20% of your score. And who would tell students to walk away from 20% of their score? The other thing that we bring to note on that is the same skills that you are teaching your students in real-time, real-world context about evidence-based text writing are the very same skills that they're going to have to understand to do the other part of the test, to do the multiple choice, to drop down and drag, the drop boxes. So one goes hand in hand. And then the last thing I'll say about deciding that, nobody needs to do that. And I see the question about the scoring. We'll get to that too. The other thing is, you're preparing these students not to just pass this test, but go out into the workforce. And if they're going out into the workforce, being able to write is a necessary skill. I don't care if you're at the community college, at the trade skills level. If you're going to do a job application, do you think anybody on that application cares why you say you wanted to apply for this job? That's not what they asked that question for. They asked that question to see if this is a person who has some command of the English language, who can speak to customers, or who can write out a sales slip, who knows how to do things. So if I've got two candidates side by side with exactly the same skill set, I'm going to probably look, and if one has better language skills than the other, who do you think is going to get that job? So that's why we say, you know, it's bigger than just what you want to get for the score on this test. You're also preparing the students for the workforce or for potential post-secondary. And so that's why it's so important. There are some people, and I think we'll save this for later, but to get the difference between, we talk about how we score, those are raw score points that we're talking about. We can put together so many raw score points from this. I cannot tell you about the conversion to scaled score that makes that 20% of their test. That's a whole other topic. And other than that, you know, those are our responses that we would have. And I think we can get a little more deeply, as Cheryl said, later, unless there are some other questions who are having to do some of this information, have to deal with this, that you feel like we need to answer at this time, Cheryl.
Yeah, I'm looking through here. Go ahead.
Cheryl, if I could I'm going to just comment for a second on a comment that Carolyn Siebert has brought up. And I think she says it in a really good way for all of us. Her comment in the chat box is, I think students are used to writing a persuasive essay. Yes, they have been doing that. And they don't understand that they're evaluating two authors. And I love her next part. I tell them they are the teacher and they have to decide which is best. And then build their argument from there. Carolyn, that's it. That's it exactly. They're having to make some decisions that they're not used to doing. They come back and forth about their own opinions. So thank you for saying that. That's really appreciated. And I think one way that we can go through and help our students maybe better understand what's being expected of them. But there's one point I want to bring back. What we talked about today within all those language examples and where students are having errors. I want you to think for a minute about what a difference it would make in our students' writing if they didn't make those errors. And we can help alleviate some of those problems. So maybe we still have some work to do in some of the areas on the extended response, but hopefully after today, some of those errors we can help eliminate because now you know where those students are struggling.
And Kelly Holt made a really, did you see her response?
Probably not.
It was really good too. It says, Carolyn, I tell them they're like a judge and the two passages are the lawyer's arguments. They don't re-argue the case. They make a judgment of which is best. So yeah, right. You're not re-arguing what's already in the prompt. So I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it.
And one other final thought, one of the reasons that Susan and Cheryl discussed at the very beginning that as Amy and Brooke and all of us and Marty got into this conversation, that's why we decided to expand this into 3 different sessions. Whenever the assessment team came to me and Susan and shared with us what they were seeing, it was like an aha moment for me and Susan, because we had, as we are getting into this was about language, but you saw how quickly we got into extended response. And we realized that we had spent so much time on extended response that maybe we as professional development preparers for you all had not spent enough time talking to you about how important the language, all of the things in today's session were, because how can you do this other thing that we all focus on if you don't know how to help them correct the basic language needs? And so I do want to kind of draw us to a close in the last few minutes to make sure we go back up to any questions regarding language, because that was the topic of the day today. And I guarantee you we will have an even more robust discussion when we're talking about the extended response.
Yeah, and there are some questions I think that we like Amy and I think we can get together on responding to more questions. I think we didn't adequately discuss how the ER is scored with the engine. I think there's still, excuse me, some questions there that I think we can provide some general clarification in that. There's also some questions about Spanish, about their, the engine does not score the Spanish ERs, those are human scored, but there is not, so those editing passages, the little drop down passages, those are not included in the Spanish test. The mechanics, grammar mechanics.
Right.
Anything else that you see that we have not addressed that that is not something that we could take care of in just a short period of time? But I hear what you're saying as far as getting additional responses to those who need them.
So what is the percentage of grammar versus reading skills? So there's a total of 8 points on those editing passages. And then I would have to look up the rest in terms of, so there's, Amy, help me, 6 reading passages.
I'm not sure that, you know, this amount of specificity is digging a little too deeply in here. So, you know, we may be able to talk in wide ranges, but it does no good to get into specifics of numbers and counts on anything, because there are different forms of the test. And the minute we start telling people there's a certain number of items here or there, and it may vary because of the way a question is asked, then people think they've missed something on the test. So I'll leave it to you all to help them with a more generalized answer.
Yeah, I'm reading through here, seeing.
One other question that is in here, quick question, can the writing part be done in Spanish? If you're taking the Spanish test, then you're writing in Spanish. So, but you know, if you're taking the English test, you are not going to do your writing in Spanish. So make sure that, you know, when the student is working on this test and they're, you know, if they're going to take the Spanish test, they will be writing in Spanish.
Right. Yeah, and a good takeaway to reinforce is the student does need to write their own original words, like simply quoting from the passage or rephrasing the passage or summarizing the passage is not going to help get a very good score, because it doesn't show original thought. And it doesn't show your use of conventions.
And the reason for that, you just said it, but I'm going to try to make it very clear. It's that the scoring engine will score original text. And if you do so much rewriting word for word, that's not original text. So you may have a very long passage, but just a few words that are yours and original, and not enough to score.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do see one other question in here from Paula about, do students need to know the names of the parts of speech and all these other fancy terms? No, we don't worry about that. We want to make sure they can apply things. And so if they're, you know, working with a collective nouns, that they know what that is, but that they would never be asked on the test, which of these is a collective noun, you know, so you don't have to worry about those types of things. Because I do know, actually, this is from my own experience itself. I may not know the name of it, but I know what I need to do and not do when I'm writing. Right. So just be aware of that.
And if people will remember, at the beginning of this slideshow, we showed a picture of what the dropdown looks like, the full passage with the dropdown items embedded. That's all a student's going to see. There's nothing asking about terms or labels. So all the student needs to do is read all 4 options and choose the one that uses formal standard English. They do not need to know what the convention is or what the term is for it. None of that. They just need to be able to recognize which one's correctly worded or correctly punctuated or correctly, you know, phrased or whatever. If that helps.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to Cheryl and to Amy, to Brooke, to Marty, Debbie, everybody, for all of the input that you have provided today. And also to each of you out there for taking your time to be with us and to, you know, just keep on plugging away with that RLA test, because we want our students to be successful. As we go through looking into I will move over here toward the end of this. Keep in mind, we have 2 more RLA sessions coming up. April 26th, that's going to be part 2. We're going to focus on reading, essential skill reading. And then May 24th, we'll be focusing on the writing. So make sure you're ready for that one as you're coming in. Then we'll wrap up this school year in June with a whole thing, a series on science. So we're really looking forward to having the next 3 sessions. And again, I thank all of you for being here with us as we've gone through. And Debbie, I'm going to hand it to you to do the final goodbye.
Well, this is our final goodbye for today, ladies and gentlemen. All the things Susan said, you've been great. You've hung with us right up until and almost after the hour. Thanks to our colleagues that Susan has already mentioned on our assessment team for their work. And I'm really looking forward to the next sessions that we finish, and we kind of complete the school year with you in June with the science session as we get through reading and writing. So be looking for the next registration. Thanks for your attention. Thank you for your very good questions. You're digging in, you're trying to help your students, and that's what we're all here trying to do. Have a great afternoon. I'm going to go watch the thunderstorm coming through Louisiana right now, which is why Susan had control of the camera, since I was afraid I was going to lose my internet. So have a great afternoon, guys. Bye-bye.